A reading from 1 Peter chapter 3, starting with verse 13. Now who will harm you if you are eager to do what is good? But even if you do suffer for doing what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear what they fear. Do not be intimidated. But in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and reverence. Keep your conscience clear, so that when you are maligned, those who abuse you for your good conduct in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if suffering should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. It's the word of the Lord for the people of God. Thanks be to God. The golden generation, which is also often referred to as the greatest generation, although they probably named them before I was born. The golden generation and the silent generation went through about 14 years of sacrifice and hardship. Either at the beginning or near the middle of their lifetimes, the stock market crashed. And that led to the Great Depression. And then in the throes of the Depression, these two generations lived through World War II. For about 14 years, these generations had to ration. They had to tighten their belts. They had to miss meals. They had to plant victory gardens. They started to defy generations of gender roles. And the women went to work in the factories. For 14 years, they were hit with some of the most devastating economic and moral circumstances one can imagine. For 14 years, they sacrificed just to live, and they sacrificed so that their country would have enough resources. It's day, 50 or 60 something of quarantine, depending on when you started, and if you feel comfortable enough to slowly start patronizing businesses again, getting haircuts, going to bars. It's been about 2 months of quarantine. And some experts are warning that if we don't handle these next steps right, it could be another 3 months of setback, if not longer. 5 months of quarantine before stuff starts to die down. And if we do this wrong, maybe a year of quarantine. Maybe the summer will be canceled. And there will be at least a year before the mass availability of a vaccine is a reality. I try to think of the golden and the silent generation when I think about the quarantine, for a number of reasons. First, they're the two generations most at risk when it comes to contracting COVID. They're the ones most likely to die, probably the highest comorbidity rates. So it's for them that we take these extra precautions. Their lives, their wisdom, their spirit, that's what we risk losing if we do this wrong. We lose artists, heroes, patriots, activists, scholars, grandparents, parents, people who lived through one of the most turbulent times in history. We lose human life if we do this wrong. And it's concentrated highly in those two generations. And secondly, I think of the ways they sacrificed, and it gives me some perspective. It's been 2 months. We've been asked to stay inside, alter our lives a little bit, but with the modern conveniences of the internet and technology, things they didn't have. Many people have lost their jobs. Almost 1,000 people have died. There's uncertainty in how state governments will be able to make budgets with these extra costs and the reduced incomes they're facing. School districts are having to slash programming. For instance, my high school, or school district I grew up in, has to slash the Japanese program. And this is the case in most places. They're losing out on a lot. People are losing out on a lot. It's inconvenient. I got my first trendy haircut probably ever right before the quarantine, and now I can't style it or cut it. I have no idea what to do with it. Things kind of suck. Then I think of these two generations. For 14 years, maybe longer, they rationed their food, their supplies. They lived off only the necessary. They sent their boys, their fathers, their husbands to war. Their daughters and wives and moms and sisters went to work. Folks didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, but people sacrificed for the good of the nation, and they had to do it for 14 years. And after 2 months, it seems like we've collectively decided we're tired, so the virus doesn't exist anymore. It's been 2 months, maybe another 3 months, and honestly, I have no idea how they did it. While looking at all they sacrificed, how long they had to endure this hardship and uncertainty, it does give me some perspective. It makes me grateful. But at the same time, I just want this to end. I want to meet everybody in person, all the church folks. I'm tired of this becoming a partisan issue. I want people to be supported. I want them to have livelihoods and a sense of purpose. And I also want to do everything we can just to keep one more life from being lost. I'm saddened hearing folks losing about their jobs. It's getting tiring hearing about how debilitating this disease is on the health of the economy, but also the health of people. I'm worried when my nurse and chaplain friends tell me their hospitals are gearing up for big waves in August and September because they believe the second wave is going to be worse, and the way we're loosening restrictions is not right, and that it's going to contribute to that second wave. I feel sick when I hear about dramatic spikes in cases, sick when I see protesters armed at Capitol buildings. I want to stop having nightmares of high-fiving somebody. Nightmares of high-fiving somebody. It's absurd. I want it to end. Last week I talked about persecution, about how some folks have been tricked into feeling persecuted when in reality they really aren't. And how real persecution is happening in the world, and our attention should be there. And this week I want to keep up with this joyful sermon topic of suffering and persecution, but we're going to talk about suffering. And this is a kind of abnormal suffering that we're going through, not kind of suffering typical in life. We're extremely inconvenienced right now. We have no real idea of how things are going to work out. We're seeing science happen in real time, people learning about the disease, what it does or does not do. There's a lot of fear and anxiety, death, people losing jobs. We're all impacted, albeit differently, by what's going on. We have all incurred some kind of suffering because of what's happening right now. Now, suffering has maybe the opposite problem of persecution. Whereas people feel persecuted when they're really not. We often try to convince people that they're not suffering when they are. or we try to dismiss the effects of their suffering as negligible. For me at least, being told that I shouldn't complain because others have it worse, that doesn't do anything to help me. Not only am I still dealing with the thing I was complaining about, now I'm also thinking about the other people that have it worse. And that also kind of gives me a sense of guilt about complaining in the first place. So we have to know this to be true, that our pain and suffering can be real while the pain and suffering of others is also real, even if their suffering is greater than our own. It doesn't become an excuse to ignore our own suffering. The suffering of others doesn't dismiss the suffering we ourselves feel, even if we should be compelled to help others with their suffering. And maybe that's why I personally am tired of commercials and advertisements saying things like, in these uncertain times, or in these trying times, we're all in this together. It's like they're trying to equivocate what's going on in the lives of people losing their jobs, people who have loved ones dying, people working 12-hour shifts as essential workers who are tired, with a business that's trying to sell you something. These aren't the same thing. We're not going through the same thing together. It feels ingenuine. It feels like they're dismissing the real discomfort of people as a cheap ploy to try to make sales. Bringing perspective is good. Saying, yes, other people are also suffering through this with you is good. Saying some people have a lot worse, and you're actually a little bit lucky for how you have things, is good. But dismissing those feelings entirely, that's harmful. Thinking about the golden generation and the silent generation, it brings me perspective. It makes me think, yeah, this sucks, but it probably won't last 14 years. Or this sucks, but I still have plenty of food to eat. What it doesn't do is dismiss the fact that this sucks right now. We are suffering in various ways, to various degrees. We are suffering. Some more, some less, but we need our suffering to be seen, not dismissed. Now, hopefully our suffering is in the name of good. As 1 Peter says, hopefully our sacrifice today is to make the world right for tomorrow. And not all of our suffering is put upon us because we are sacrificing for the good of others, but the suffering we do have, the boredom, staying inside, the extra precaution and risk and the time and money it takes to hold that, hopefully that sacrifice, the suffering that comes from that, is for the good of tomorrow, for the good of other people right now. Because it is good to sacrifice some comfort and convenience to protect the lives of others, and sometimes that means we will suffer a little bit. And we hope that suffering is for the good of others, but I say again, that suffering can't be dismissed. We can't pretend that life isn't hard at times. Can't pretend that because others have it worse, that we don't feel the ill effects of suffering on our lives. We can't pretend it's not there. And the good news, the gospel message, is that our suffering is not dismissed. As 1 Peter says, for Christ also suffered for sins, once for all, the righteous and the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. Christ suffered, died, so that there may be no obstacle between us and God. Christ suffered, died, to show that God's love has no boundaries. Christ suffered and died knowing the full extent of being human. Christ suffered and died, and God understands the full extent of our suffering. Like us, God suffered. There are times when we bask in the joy of resurrection, but there are also times when we know Christ intimately, when we most connect to God in our suffering. Christ did not go from death to resurrection or from life to resurrection, but Christ suffered in life, suffered until his death. God does not dismiss our suffering, and Christ did suffer. There's a work of art that's included in the bulletin and also I'll bring up on the video. It's the Eisenheim altarpiece. It depicts the suffering Christ on the cross. But notably, Jesus has boils and pockmarks, signs of the plague across his body. The monastery of St. Anthony in Eisenheim, which is where this work is located, specialized in hospital work, and the Antonian monks cared for plague victims and people with skin diseases. The patients being treated in the monastery would see Christ afflicted with the same ailments they are experiencing. Christ knows their suffering, suffers as they have, and his suffering on the cross is for them. They have not been dismissed or forgotten by God, and so it is true for us. At this time, some perspective is good. Things could probably be worse, and there is hope. The plague ended. The Spanish flu ended. The 14 years of economic turmoil and war for the golden and silent generation, they ended. There is hope. We Christians know eternally the hope of resurrection. But in this time, though, you need to acknowledge your suffering. Grieve what has been lost. Feel frustrated, angry, lackadaisical, morose, melancholy, sad, whatever it is. Feel it. Don't dismiss it. Don't let anybody else dismiss that for you. You wanted to go on vacation and had to cancel? That sucks. Don't let people tell you it doesn't. You wanted to celebrate the holidays with your family, maybe see a newborn baby, and you can't? That sucks. You want to walk across the stage for graduation and you can't now? That sucks. Is it the worst thing in the world? No. But you are allowed to be bummed about it. We worship a God who knows what that feels like and is there with you when you're feeling it. And you can feel that. You can be bummed. You can be upset even if other people have it worse. And God can hold you in that. God so intimately knows the extremes of pain, knows death. God knows suffering and disappointment. God has felt anger and resentment. God is not dismissing you when you feel these things. It is not un-Christian to be a little bit upset that this has affected your life. God is there with you. Suffering as you suffer. Christ on the cross knows our pain, even if it feels comparatively trivial. We know the joys of resurrection. But God also knows the pains of defeat and sadness that we go through. God is there with us when we feel it. We are not dismissed. God becomes co-sufferer with us. Now, the Christian life compels us to acts of charity and solidarity, but the Christian life also compels us to acknowledge our own pain and suffering and to take care of it, to not dismiss it, to not let other people dismiss it. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian who was part of the anti-Nazi movement in Germany, and he was eventually jailed and killed for his activity. And he wrote in a letter from prison, "Only the suffering God can help." The hope and joy of resurrection will come. And hopefully with it, new life, new ways of being, new ways of taking care of each other, of bringing ointment for the ails of society, for the ails of those who are suffering greatly. But in this moment right now, the suffering God can help. Don't be dismissed, but live fully into what it means to be a person, what it means to be a child of God, and know that God is there beside you. And the suffering God is there beside you. Amen.